We will be using the Q&A function. You can post your questions there. We will be doing our best to get to everyone's question. Our apologies in advance if we don't. We are very glad to have you here with us, especially as we are still online in this virtual format. Also, we will be using closed captioning during this event. If you'd like to view it, you can enable captions at the bottom of your screen using the CC live transcript icon. So it is my pleasure to introduce both the book and its writer. Against White Feminism. The book is described as upper middle class white women have long been heralded as experts in feminism. They have presided over multinational feminist organizations and written much of what we consider to be the feminist canon, espousing sexual liberation, satisfaction, LGBTQ inclusion, racial solidarity, all while branding the language of the movement in itself in whiteness, speaking over Black and brown women in an effort to uphold privilege and the perceived cultural superiority. An American Muslim woman, attorney, political philosopher, Rafia Zakaria champions reconstruction of feminism in her book, centering women of color in this transformative overview and counter-manifesto to white feminism's global, long-lasting affinity with colonial, patriarchal, and white supremacist ideals. Rafia is the author of The Upstairs Wife, An Intimate History of Pakistan, Veil, and many essays for The Guardian, CNN, the New York Times Book Review. She is a regular columnist for Dawn in Pakistan and the Baffler in the United States. She'll be joined in conversation with Wajahat Ali, a Daily Beast columnist. He's currently working on his first book, Go Back to Where You Came From, and other helpful recommendations on becoming American, which will be published in January 2022 by Norton. On behalf of Politics and Prose, please join me in welcoming tonight Rafia Zakaria and Wajahat Ali. Once again, your copy of the book can be purchased in the link in our comments section. All right, welcome.
Thank you, Aisha, for that lovely introduction, and Mubarak, Rafia, for your book. A book release was yesterday. Here's the book right here, Against White Feminism, and even R2D2 approves. And you have the book in your bookshelf as well. The book that was released just yesterday, Against White Feminism, received rave reviews. NPR called it a, quote, urgent call to action for solidarity and justice. Kirkus gave it a rave review and said it's a worthy contribution to feminist and activist studies. And writer Roxane Gay calls it a, quote, must read and a, quote, thoughtful and provocative collection calling for sharper feminism that decenters whiteness and the conditions that allowed white feminism to prosper. And in addition, Rafia is, as mentioned, an author of 3 books, a columnist, philosopher, and she was also the first Pakistani American woman to serve as director of Amnesty International USA. The first question, Rafia, is a softball down the middle. Why do you hate white women?
Hi, Wajahat. I was going to start with like a little Oscar type thank you speech.
You can, go ahead. I want to hear it.
Thanking all, and you know, and it includes white women. This book wouldn't exist if it weren't for my editors, Elaine Mason at Norton and Hermione Thompson at Hamish Hamilton in the UK. And of course, my agent, Sarah Bowling. So I'm, and my publicist, Angela, here in the US, and Rosie in the UK. So that's my little Oscar speech.
So you don't hate all white women.
I don't hate all white women.
Those are the good white women.
I hate all white. Actually, I don't hate any white women, and that's the reason why the very first sentence in the book is that you do not have to be white to be a white feminist. You do not have to. You can be white and a feminist, and and not be a white feminist. So you can be brown and be a white feminist as well. And the reason for that is that white feminism, as I see it, is a refusal to acknowledge the role that white racial privilege has played in dominating the discussions within feminism. defining feminism, defining its agendas, both within the United States and abroad. And so I don't hate white women at all. In fact, I feel that, and I mentioned that in the book many times too, that white women, I don't believe that a failure to acknowledge white privilege in the past has always come from a place of malice. But I do think that if we are to sort of salvage a feminism that is still powerful and still meaningful to women, that we have to have this conversation about race within feminism, within the feminist movement, about what it has enabled and what it continues to enable even today. So that's like the disclaimer comes fast and early in the book, so that it can be understood that this is not an attack on white women. I'm not trying to take white women out of feminism. I'm not trying to, but I am trying to excise white racial privilege from within feminism. So I believe that if you can think critically and have honest conversations about this, that it is something that will stop being essentially like a roadblock within the feminist movement.
So
because that's what race has become.
I want to do a quick follow-up to that, because you mentioned the roadblocks, and you mentioned you want to have the conversation with women, not just white women who identify with white feminism, but like I was sharing with you right before we went live, by simply retweeting this event or retweeting your book, I've been hit by self-identifying white feminism as, look, this is unfair and hateful to feminists, and it's divisive, and it's the opposite of being inclusive and empowering, and they're just shutting down. And so how do you reach out to them?
Well, I do see that knee-jerk reaction quite often, because I think that white women, especially white women of a certain age that grew up during, the 60s and 70s, have a knee-jerk reaction and just think that talking about race is inherently divisive. And I would say that is the reason why we haven't had the conversation that we will be having today, I hope, before. It's because this is the one issue that's been swept under the rug, so that we can, in the name of maintaining solidarity. And I believe the reality is the complete opposite of that we are unable to construct solidarity because we don't talk about race, because we don't talk about all the ways in which white feminism marginalizes, and it's not even just a matter of what you say, because you can have white feminists who overtly say they're intersectional, they put in their Twitter bios, they're all about it. But when it comes to actually ceding space to women of color, to feminists of color, so that they can have an opportunity to lay out their ideas and agendas and even opinions, right? I mean, the example that you're giving me just now from tweeting is that's exactly what I'm saying, is that's textbook, is that not only are we not going to allow this, but if someone else brings it up, we're going to shut them down. Is essentially not feminist, right? So if I'm talking about race, then I'm not a feminist, because a feminist is someone now who doesn't want to bring race into the conversation. And that has been the standard, I think, for decades now. But, time's up. It's time for feminism to become forward-looking, and it's time for it to actually do the things that are necessary for the movement to become intersectional, rather than just saying, oh, well, I'm an intersectional feminist.
You know, in order to talk about how we can achieve that in specifics, just to lay a groundwork for the conversation, and just understanding some terms as you define them, how would you then define and describe feminism as it should be?
I think feminism as it should be essentially a political struggle that is focused towards taking down the institutions that patriarchy has built up, that, systemically exclude and minimize women. And I think that without that political struggle, without having a positive program that says that this is what we want, there can be no feminism. So, for instance, I'm very much against ideas. One of the sort of choice feminist ideas that has been popularized within the last couple of decades, which says, for instance, that, oh, well, I am a woman, and so I choose to wear this outfit or this lipstick or read this book, and that's a feminist choice. Any choice that I make as a woman is a feminist choice. And the problem with that, and it's a great way of sort of illustrating just how devoid of politics our feminism has become, is that no, the choices that you make have political implications, and they affect other women. So, if you are out there, for instance, supporting gender norms that, alienate, many people of varied identities, if you are out saying that, oh, men should be the head of the family, you can't choose to say that and then say, oh, well, that's my choice, and since I choose it, that's right too. So I think that there has to be a revitalization of feminism's political origins. I think it needs to be more radical. I think we've spent a lot of time on recognition, which I think is important. So, have that number of minorities on your board, or have a certain number of them in your workforce, etc. But that has gotten reduced to a kind of tokenism, because we're not willing to go all the way, and all the way means we have to be, we have to have a redistributive agenda attached to recognition. So it's not just enough to sort of put people from disadvantaged, marginalized backgrounds in, say, a board. It's also important to remember that, it may not be as easy for them to put all the per diem expenses on their credit card, because they might not have a credit card. But it's all of these little things, and the state's responsibility in them. I mean, I think that one of the biggest problems is that when feminism has relied on the state, white feminism has relied on the state, it's always been, to, for instance, say, oh, well, we need protection from terrorism, so let's go bomb this country, and then we'll save on the women on the side, and then that's going to be a worthwhile thing to do. Instead, that power needs to be focused towards redistribution, towards the fact that it's not enough to just have a certain sort of diversity quota. It's important to then enable and create the capacity. The government has to create that capacity so that the people who have been marginalized can actually rise up to parity.
Before we zoom out and talk about some of these countries where the benevolent US leaders have tried to save brown women from brown men by bombing them for 20 years, I want to take the politics local. I want to take it personal. because they often say all politics are personal and local. And you mentioned tokenism and, being a descent of Pakistani immigrants and oftentimes being the only Muslim in the room, and being lucky like you in these different spaces in academia or think tanks or in media. When I see the wizards and I meet the wizards who are behind the curtains, the first thing I notice is I'm the darkest thing in the room. It's like me and a plant that are the darkest things in the room. And how does it feel for you to be in these spaces as a Pakistani woman, as a Muslim woman, and where you are often the token brown woman, the token Muslim woman at the conference, at the keynote, at the lunch, with white feminists who are supposed to be your allies? In these spaces and these conversations, what do you think remains unsaid and what should be said instead?
That's a great question. And, one of the most frustrating experiences where a lot of my experience of kind of being sidelined and marginalized or just not being talked over or ignored come from, my experience as a human rights activist and a board member of a very large human rights organization. And the shock that I got is that while I was in the room, unless I was telling a very particular kind of story of trauma, personal trauma, or the larger trauma of women who look like me.
Torture porn, that's what we call it in the business.
Right, exactly. Unless I was doing that, no one was really interested in listening to me. So that if I made a policy proposal, I spoke up during this meeting where I was the only, in many cases, I was the only, not many cases, I was the only woman of color. So in those situations, I would say something, okay? I'm sitting on this board, this long sort of table filled with all sorts of people. And there's dead silence. There's just nothing. Okay? And then the discussion moves on, and someone else, a white woman, says the exact same thing that I said. And everyone will be like, oh, that's such a good idea.
Wow.
That's fantastic. Okay. So, and this didn't happen once. It happened to me again and again and again. Right. And, of course, and if you get upset about it and say, hey, I just said that. I literally just said that. And you guys totally ignored and said absolutely nothing. Then you're like the angry, combative brown woman, who has a gripe against everybody and who's not interested in listening and who really should consider her ideas before she talks. So it's like, like I say, it's like elbowing, the white women on the board. That was like, I felt this was their thing. They're just like, elbow this one out, and now elbow this one out, and elbow this one out, and then I'll be chairman of the board. And that did happen in that, white.
You had to play like Kill Bill just to have a space and a voice.
Right, because the issue is that, we've, even among white women, there's this very kind of the essential lean in girl boss idea that I have to get ahead at any cost. And my ambition precedes, and this is in a human rights context. My ambition matters more than the actual work that we're doing, or in cases my ambition just matters more. And so it's this very much climb the ladder mentality, and the consequences, just like, okay, fine, you're not going to listen to Rafia, that's okay. But the deeper and more problematic consequence is that that's what kills solidarity. That's what makes it impossible to have a collective idea of success, a collective idea of solidarity, of figuring out how women can work together to get ahead instead of sabotaging each other all the time. And I think that, I mean, it's deeply, deeply upsetting. And it's also upsetting in the sense that, you know, when women like me are included in these settings, a calculation is made about, okay, so this quote or this amount of brownness or blackness on our board is not going to lead to us having to change the structures that essentially elevate white people. And that calculation is made again and again, right? And the voices that are elevated, you know, I might be the like have been like a outlier, but usually the brown and black people who are selected for these roles are ones that provide a, you know, like 100% affirmation of like the white woman on the top, her agenda, and that we're gonna follow it, and I believe in this 100%. And those are the voices that are amplified. So it's a frustrating place to be, because, you know, you if you speak up, you're the troublemaking brown woman or black woman. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, is because I'm happy to take the punches. You know, I realize that it's not possible for every woman in every situation, every woman of color, to speak out and say these things. But what the book does is provide an entry point that can become the basis of those conversations that can be had, you know, among whatever group the women who read this book is,
Well,
or find themselves.
We need that conversation right now, because zooming out, we see how this white feminism actually caused immense damage to women in a country right now, which is in the news for all the wrong reasons. I'm talking about Afghanistan. And with the 20th anniversary with the war on terror coming right up, the Taliban are back in charge. And right during this conversation, headline news came that Taliban, surprise, surprise, are using force against the peaceful protesters. And you in your book are very critical on how white feminism and specifically well-intentioned NGOs actually failed Afghan women. And so it's a two-part question. And I'm sure that the people who have joined us today are very interested in this. First and foremost, how did white feminism fail Afghanistan and Afghan women? If they did, maybe I'm assuming, number one. And number two, that tragedy is ongoing right now as millions of Afghans are seeking refugee and resettlement, literally left behind and discarded by the US empire and the US war on terror. Everyone says, think about the women, think about the women, but we're not really doing much to help them. So how can feminists and allies actually lead the way and do it correctly this time? It's a big question, two-part question, but let's talk about the first one. First question first is, how do they get this so wrong?
Well, they got this so wrong because they essentially went in with bad intentions. And the fact is that, you know, and before actually I get into it, I want to preface this with saying how disappointed, dejected, and fed up I feel at seeing the same old, tired 20-year-old mythologies of the Afghan women as these, you know, women that are oppressed, that we need to save, that are going to have to wear burqas, that are going to, I mean, all the tired tropes about Muslim women have been dug out. And there we have Clarissa Ward, you know, in the burqa shop, and we have her mistranslating Allahu Akbar as death to America.
Did you do that? Did you do that recently?
Yeah. Unfortunately, on CNN. So it's really depressing to watch this, because it shows that Americans and even American women learned absolutely nothing in 20 years about Muslim women, the complexity of their lives, and are still kind of reducing it all to the veil. Oh my God, if you don't wear a burqa, you've got the best life. And if you wear one, then oh my God, it doesn't matter what else you have going on, you have the worst life.
And also in 20 years, we haven't been able to differentiate or understand the difference between burqa, niqab, and hijab or shawl. It's all the same.
No. And so, I mean, the story begins actually with the burqa. I mean, before, in the 1990s, when the Taliban first came in, before 9/11, feminist majority was running a campaign to end gender apartheid in Afghanistan. And the campaign was, as you can imagine, a very second wave feminist kind of a campaign, in which the idea was that, oh well, Afghan women out there must want the same things as suburban middle class women in New Jersey, and so we're gonna like make a campaign and export our version of feminism and women's rights to them. So this was going on. And then, of course, and it gained traction because Jay Leno's wife actually took up the cause, and she started like publicizing this. And, when 9/11 happened, now the US and the Bush administration was looking for a country to bomb, because essentially we had to avenge 9/11 and had to make a show of force as fast as possible. And so they essentially decided that they were going to invade, and they were going to use this whole, theme of ending gender apartheid in Afghanistan and saving Afghan women as the sort of cover story that was going to give kind of within the United States the moral meat, to go bomb a country. But the idea was and such that when Colin Powell announced like they were going to war in Afghanistan, leaders of the feminist majority were present in the White House and were meeting with the different leadership. So that intermingling was present right from the beginning. Except for one congresswoman, Barbara Lee, all the women in Congress voted for this war.
Well, every congressperson. She was the only one who in 2001, and I was in California, she was my representative at the time. She was the only congressperson to vote against the AUMF.
Right, because she might have seen what was coming, which was that you cannot allow feminism to be co-opted into a war project that is being taken out to serve your strategic interests as a country. What does feminism even have to do with that? And what it did is essentially taint feminism altogether, because you can't bomb people into being feminists of the sort that you want them to be. So not only was there a complete lack of recognition for the Afghan women's groups that were on the ground, that were asking for peace, that did not want an invasion, right? Not only were they sidelined, but then it was this idea that we're bringing the real feminism, we're going to bring it. And that's how they went in. And I mean, at that time, you couldn't say a word against this project. I remember the time around 9/11, you could not say a word about how the US wasn't really in Afghanistan to save Afghan women. So, what do we have now? We've bombed the country for decades, droned it, bombed it, destroyed everything there was in terms of institutions. We installed a puppet government in Kabul. And we just so now they're going to show like the 5% of Afghan women that live in Kabul, and they show them having boutiques or whatnot, and look, that's empowerment. Well, that's not empowerment at all, because the way you got it wrong is that you created a fake aid economy, right? You told them that the meaning of empowerment was not a political struggle to take down the patriarchy, but it was just this neoliberal technocratic term where if X number of job trainings were done and certain number of internships were awarded, then ta-da, you're going to become, and I mean, this issue cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They spent $400 million, USAID, their biggest program is called Promote. And its goal was to train 75,000 Afghan women, provide them job training. And the Special Inspector General found that maybe only 3 Afghan women had benefited from this, and that USAID could not account for where the rest of the money went. So these issues are still not being talked about. And so, because the idea still is that a white woman in this professionalized feminist form, as sit on the boards of like many of these transnational NGOs, that professionalized feminist can develop programs that are going to be relevant and useful for women way on the other side of the world who have a completely different belief system.
And who are oftentimes seen by those very women as backwards and savage and in need of Western liberation, right?
Well, but that's that's another aspect of this, is that, look, the fact is that the framework of feminism as it exists, and I personally reject the wave analysis because it essentially builds all of feminism around white women, okay, and their victories and efforts without looking at what was happening in the rest of the world, at any time. But what it also does is promote a certain kinds of values as truly feminist. So, being rebellious is truly feminist. Brilliant, I don't know, right? Being a risk taker is very feminist, but being cautious and focusing on endurance is not feminist. And when you do that, you leave out everybody who's not white from the story, because those are essentially factors that allow you to highlight white women as truly pioneering and ignore everyone else. I have written this rebellious book and I'm out saying all these things, but I stand on the shoulders of many, many women in my family who were resilient, who didn't like do the sort of arc of the Muslim story that's permitted in America, right? Where it's like, oh, my life was I was so oppressed. And then I came to America and I was free and it was so great. They didn't live that trajectory. But they fought the battles that were necessary so that I could get my education. My mother, learned to drive in a time where almost no women drove in Karachi. So she could take me to this school that was very far away because she knew I would get an excellent education there. And so those sorts of acts of feminism that are happening all over the brown and black and world, and even in brown and black communities here in the United States, those are eliminated because
they're not seen as sexy. They're not seen as sexy. You can't capitalize it. You can't put it on the poster for Sex and the City 2 in Abu Dhabi.
Right.
Which was not filmed in Abu Dhabi, by the way. But taking to that, and I want to talk a little bit about how this type of corrupt, if you will, commodified feminism is exported on Muslim women. But before I get to that, the second part of the question is, now that there's conversations opening up about how some feminists, including Laura Bush, by the way, were part and parcel of the Empire Project that devastated Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen for the past 20 years. What can feminism do now? Or can feminism do anything right now to help these men and women and these children in Afghanistan?
Well, for starters, it can stop talking about Afghan women as if the single central issue of concern for them is the burqa. That's step one. That's very basic, and I shouldn't have to say it, but it's being completely ignored. The second is, the vast majority of people who are on TV who are doing analysis are all either white men or white women. and they're having this conversation about Afghanistan amongst themselves. And that's exactly the wrong thing. Because, like you said, the example of Congresswoman Barbara Lee, I mean, there were people who saw this, who saw that this would happen, because the same logic of white supremacist thinking is involved in both, I'll give you the example of the Violence Against Women Act. What was that trying to do? It was white women demanding that they be protected from sexual violence. And Black and Latino women said, if you're going to pass this law that says that someone has to be arrested at every domestic violence call, right? Then what's going to happen is a whole, Black and Latino men are going to be arrested at a much, much higher rate. They said that, but of course they were completely ignored. They were completely ignored. And of course that law went into effect. And not only were Black men arrested at 5 times the rate of white men, but then violence against Black women increased because of that. Because it contributed to mass incarceration, breakdown of homes, and therefore greater violence for women. So it's this idea that white women know what's best for everyone. And it was the same idea that was at play in the war, where it's like white women, Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, even Gloria Steinem supported the invasion,
right,
want protection from terrorism. Protect us from terrorism. So America goes out and bombs this country, which, had actually no, its misfortune was that Osama bin Laden had taken refuge there. But other than that, it had absolutely no connection whatsoever.
19 foreign hijackers, 15 of the 19 were from Saudi Arabia.
Right,
One from Lebanon, one from UAE, 2 from none
say,
from Iraq, none from Afghanistan.
No, right, but it had to be done because it's the same logic of protection that's demanded by white women without listening to what the consequences of that enabling of the state's coercive power will be. So you take the state and tell them to sort of use its the power to incarcerate, to take in all these men so that you'll be safe. And then, you go there and say, ask the state, oh, go bomb this place. And then I'll come and make it feminist, right? So it's kind of like, we'll bomb it, we'll ruin it, and then send this interior decorator, and she'll hire, hang a couple of pictures in the corner and say, ta-da, these women are free. So, the repetitive nature of the mistakes is what really makes me angry.
It's sad also, right? And speaking about the repetitive nature of this, it cannot occur without another partner, and that partner, in my opinion, is media representation and narratives. And specifically, Madhulika, who's watching, is on the same wavelength as me, because she wants to talk about the section in your book, which I found fascinating, called compulsory sexuality. And tying it together, I remember watching Sex and the City 2. I got an advanced screening when I was a film critic, and I'm watching Sex and the City 2 as the 4 girls go to Abu Dhabi, which was not filmed in Abu Dhabi, and the women and the culture and the country that they represent. I've been to that country. I'm like, it was like an Orientalist wet dream. And the movie ends with Kim Cattrall's character accidentally spilling over her purse, and condoms fall out, and all the Muslim men surround her. Remember that? And they chase her, and then she goes through the souk, and then veiled women protect her, and then they take them inside, and these veiled women then take off their veils, and they're wearing like Louis Vuitton like purses and like these high heels. And that was the example of like the liberated woman, right? Like, oh, look, the Muslim woman in the souk in Abu Dhabi is just like you because she wears these high heels and has purses. And so, explain to me this phenomenon of how you encountered compulsory sexuality. Unpack that for us, and how that has been exported, actually both imported internally in America, but also exported to Muslim majority countries and women.
Yeah, so what I mean by compulsory sexuality, and that whole idea is that one of the chapters in the book is dedicated to this premise that sexual empowerment is the sum total of empowerment.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that, and in a very personal sense, is that as a Muslim woman, for instance, if I am in conversation with or at an event and there are other white women who are also in media or writers or whatever, I have always felt that I can't, to break into the feminism clique in the United States, as a Muslim woman, I have to perform being sexually liberated. So if I'm not talking a lot about sex and how I love sex and how the people I have, whatever, all the aspects of sex that kind of are a prerequisite for, expected as a prerequisite by sex positive feminists who've essentially swallowed the whole pill of sex positive feminism is the sum total of empowerment wholesale, right? So if women, and it's worked really well in the US, this idea that sexual empowerment is the sum total of empowerment. Because why? Because it's a capitalist country. And if you're telling women that, like being sort of sexually assertive all the time is empowerment, then they're going to want to buy things that sort of signal that they are sexually empowered, and there's the high heels and expensive shoes, bags, whatever. It's going to get feminism caught up in this sort of endless consumption, which is where we find it today. So by compulsory sexuality, that I'm talking very specifically about this performance of sexual liberation that is required, and which is so petty when you talk about it, but it's so prevalent when you look around you.
Right.
So there's the Sex in the City. So if India has their version of Sex in the City, of women really wanting to have sex and like having many sexual partners and boasting about it, well, India's on the way to true empowerment, right? And it's just such a ridiculous frame to apply to the world, because it essentially mistakes the refusal to perform sexual liberation before an audience as a lack of sexual liberation in itself. So the first thing that would be was like, oh well, this chick, she's criticizing sexual liberation, and so therefore she's Muslim, and who knows, Pakistan repressive, this that, and so we can't really listen to her. But the fact is that a lot of women around the world are sexually liberated, but not interested in performing or becoming a Carrie and walking down the streets of New York in her tutu. But that's the dream that's sold, right? Because it's so easy to buy things and feel empowered, and it's an utter waste of the power of feminism. It's an utter waste of women's lives, spent in the acquisition of all these things that they need to make themselves sexy. So I'm not against sexy. I'm not against sexual liberation. I'm not against sex positive feminists asserting themselves in whatever way that they want to, or anybody else. But I am against the refusal to notice how that becomes an imperative, how that has become an imperative, a precondition that is like you have to sort of prove your credentials around that somehow or the other by, and then you'll be considered, okay, well, she's a real feminist. Otherwise, white feminists are by and large going to ignore you. And I've seen that. I've experienced that with with the launch of the book. There's many prominent white feminists who did not support the book very pointedly, because
what did they say to you specifically when you asked them for a blurb or you asked them for support?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, nobody is racist in this overt way anymore where they say, oh, well, you know, your book, it's about this, and I don't agree with your critique. And therefore, like, I would welcome that. You know, I would welcome people having that kind of exchange with me. I don't think it's racist to disagree with my book by any means. And, but instead, it's like this quiet sidelining, you know, where like, there's groups of prominent white feminists that all blurb each other's books, you know, and
Example.
each
What are
other's.
some names?
Nah, the names, I don't know. I've already named a lot of names in the book. They're in
Yeah.
there. Go look at the
You went
book.
after Steinem. You went after Steinem. You went after Now. You went after some heavy hitters in that book.
I have. And so, and that's why I had to do it, is because that's the reason why no one goes after them, is because to get a feminist book out and be considered legitimate and be discussed in any way, the idea is that you have to kind of make nice with them. Right? And if you're not going to make nice with them, then your book will be a fail. And I took the risk of not making nice because I felt that these things are being felt by a lot of people, and that they should have, you know, and I might have committed career suicide by doing that, but I'm willing to take that on because I feel a sense of responsibility toward all the women that don't fit into these slots, you know, and a lot of white women are among them as well.
I don't think it's career suicide. I think your book will do really well, as we say, inshallah. I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A and the times. Don't worry for those who are watching. There's about 13 minutes left, and Hayat had a very long but intelligent question there. I saw that, Hayat, specifically about this, you know, you mentioned in this book, this white savior industrial complex. And I'm going to try to synthesize her question and talk about something that you mentioned in your book, right? You mentioned this great quote from the academic Gayatri Spivak, which is, you know, white men are saving brown women from brown men, which you refer to often, and which really hits us hard as we're talking about Afghanistan, as we're seeing the 20-year war on terror. And speaking about this white savior industrial complex that you name in the book, you also name something which I thought was very interesting called securo-feminism. And can you unpack that, how women's rights activists and feminism has been co-opted, or at times even has worked hand in hand with this counterterrorism agenda, and actually undermined women, but really, honestly, Muslim women around the world?
Yeah, I mean, secure feminism is not my term. It's a term coined by Professor Laila Abulahod, who wrote Do Muslim Women Need Saving?
Great book.
Yeah, and who was an inspiration to me. And what she talks about when she's talking about secure feminism is this alignment of large transnational NGOs and their agendas to empower women, etc., with the intentions and sort of agenda of empire. So you have the war on terror, and then you have like these transnational NGOs, and they just essentially came together. And what secure feminism means is essentially that you know, you're going to dangle the possibility of inclusion before marginalized women, in Muslim women, Black women, whoever, if they're willing to support your larger project of demonizing Black men or brown men as terrorists or criminals. And that's the very particular definition of secure feminism. And I think that it's very much in play. I mean, I talk about it in relation to Zero Dark 30 and this, you know, idea of like the very, very, not just white, they found a very light white person, you know, to go, and she's willing to torture, and she's a killer. And so therefore she's strong, and that therefore she's going to save America, and she's going to, you know, catch these brown men and get them punished. Well, catching terrorists and you know, I mean, I'm not saying it was like the whole effort to capture bin Laden was somehow misdirected, but I am saying that it created a particular sort of character, and the sort of appeal of that can be seen in the fact that now the CIA very recently was airing a commercial in which they showed a Latina woman, and she's talking about how joining the CIA has really made her, strong, and how she's intersectional feminist, and she's all of these woke terms, and but there she is, working for the CIA, which, as we know, has killed, tortured, disappeared thousands and thousands of brown people. And so it's a very, and the extent of it, one last point is, even the UN is currently carrying out countering violent extremism programs in which Muslim women are being asked to inform on the men, and sort of make them, kind of give them a frame with which they look with suspicion on everyone, and in which they're sort of signing on to being the minders, and against terrorism, the world's minders against terrorism. So the only way now Muslim women can get any worth is if they prove their value by talking about how many terrorists they can
The
get.
good Muslim, it's the good Muslim, bad Muslim narrative that really you saw even manufactured in narratives post 9/11, even in shows like Homeland or 24, as they were going against this villainous, savage Muslim horde. There was always that one good Muslim FBI agent or CIA agent that was willing to do the right work. And I feel like that token representation is also what you have briefly touched upon when it comes to being that token woman of color in the organizations, right? And now we have this moment where everyone is interested in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And we have this question that from an anonymous attendee, which was kind of piggybacking on what I really wanted was your thoughts on how those corporations or those industries or those schools who are truly interested in D&I can do it properly. She or he asks, how do we shift from tokenism of women of color in positions of powers, right? Example, boards, policy, executive leadership, to actually occupying meaningful positions that can truly affect change. And to edit that question a bit, I don't think it even has to do with boards or policy. I just think it could be literally anywhere in which there's a space.
I think that it's very important to start with having conversations about systemic racism, whether it's within your family or within your friend group, or your 5 other people that you work with. Those conversations are the elephants in the room in America, in workplaces, within family contexts that are interracial. And the problem of tokenism can be solved by championing policies that make the issue not just recognition, where you recognize as brown person, black person, Muslim person, but also looking into redistribution, so that the communities of where these people are, marginalized people are coming from, have access to creating greater capacity for having these discussions and for having parity. I mean, we're not in this country willing to talk about the redistributive aspect of it. And that's why tokenism has become such a problem. The reason it's become a problem is that, under recognizing someone's identity, recognizing their experiences is the first step towards a deeper recognition of their marginalization and what they need, what they actually need. And that part is absent, because it's like we're just not going to talk about that part. The second issue is that you do have to sort of. I have faith. I have faith that a lot of white people can put their defensiveness aside, and also that a lot of white people are deeply troubled by these issues, even when they see them happening around them, but they don't know where to start or how to sort of begin this conversation where it can be more honest. Because, the Black person who is your coworker isn't suddenly going to put out their guts before you because you decided to have a conversation with them and ask them about race.
And
Like,
they might not even be trained, and they might be exhausted, and might not be their job, and they're
it's
not
not
magic.
their job. It's not their job. And that's why, like, I wrote the whole book, is because, you know, the individual Black and brown person, woman of color should not be expected to provide the sort of education that I'm trying to provide to you personally. And to expect them to do that is absolutely wrong, because they, you know, it's not their job. It's simply not their job. And
Rafia,
it's
I have you for 5 minutes, and for probably 4 minutes. And I really want to ask two quick questions from the audience. One of them, it's a big one, but let's see if we can get it within 2-3 minutes. It's anonymous. She said, "What are your recommendations for women who consider themselves women of color but not accepted because they're light-skinned? Feminism has become black and white, often leaving out brown women." And you know, this question has been asked for a lot of people. It's become tokenized or simply reduced to black and white. And there's a lot of Asian women, South Asian women who say, we don't want to step on Black women. Should we not speak out? What's our place?
Well, you know, I can give you my opinion on that, which is that I think that Black women have faced more discrimination and continue to face more discrimination than absolutely anybody else in not even just the US, in the world. And so that has to be a point of starting, is that they are in that position. So, but at the same time, I don't think that, I mean, the people that have embraced me the most have been African American women. So I don't think that they're out there to exclude other women. It's just that other women are being incentivized by white women to sort of think white, you know, and to not sort of recognize even to themselves their identity as a brown woman or Asian woman or whatever. So I would suggest that they resist the temptation to think white. You know, like I said, you don't have to be white to be a white feminist, right? So there are choices there. These are deeply political and deeply consequential choices that you make. And, you know, I can't prescribe what they may be for everybody, but I do prescribe for all women of color the refusal to think white, and also to an extent to have empathy for those who have suffered less than you. So not just more than you, but also less than you. So I will say that to have these conversations with white women, that aspect is necessary. You know, I have to stop saying, well, I've suffered so much, I don't need to like listen to this woman anymore or talk to her, etc. So I have to get through that impulse myself. But I think that, you know, the urgency of just what women are facing today in the post-COVID environment, in the insanely skyrocketing levels of violence against women all over the world, in watching what white men, for instance, have done in these wars and continue to do, that is imperative enough for us to solve, you know, not solve, but for us to reach out, for us to reach out to each other. I don't want, you know, the women who are alive today to have the same conversation with their daughters that I've had to have, right? Because it's the same thing. Nothing has really changed in 20 years.
But hopefully your book disrupts that narrative, pushes things forward. In the final 20 seconds that I have before Aisha comes and yells at me, Carmen asked a question. Thank you for this crucial conversation. And then she gave a heart emoji. What is the last book you really enjoyed reading?
The last book I really enjoyed reading was, I would say, Empress by Ruby Lal. It's about Empress Noor Jahan, and also published by Norton. And it's about her life in the Mughal court. And it's an incredible book because it, once again, shows that there are a lot of feminists who have existed all around the world that have not been enumerated, in within sort of the limited scope of white feminism that we are currently sort of using at the moment.
Thank you, Rafia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Buy the book. It's right there. It was published yesterday, Against White Feminism. And Aisha, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Wajahat, for moderating and for fielding all these questions. It definitely feels like an hour was not enough time to cover all of this. Good thing is the book is here. It is amazing. It is for sale. You can see the link in our chat feature to purchase the book at our website. You can drop by the store. Thank you to Rafia for taking one for the team and writing this book for the rest of us. That is it from me. That is it from us. We couldn't do these events without the support of our writers. All right.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Rafia.